while certain claim systemic racism, I don't think it exists in our country. Our people are not racist. Other answer, individual or interpersonal racism is pretty easy to explain. It's name-calling. Systemic racism is bigger and it's more complicated, and there's more skepticism about whether it really exists. Today, in Of Public Utility, we speak about what science teaches us about the scale of racism. Now that racism has been defined in the first video, we can explore how this ideology can be distributed over different scales ranging from individual and systemic to structural racism. Firstly, at the individual level, two behaviors are important to understand the perpetuation of racism, either by those who are actively contributing to discrimination and even, unfortunately, by some victims of discriminations. The first behavior is called the personally mediated racism, which is related to the active and passive contributions of individuals in the perpetuation of prejudices and discriminations. Individuals could participate in explicit racism when they openly embrace the belief that race or ethnicity is an important determinant of human traits and abilities. They consequently hold prejudicial attitudes toward members of the pseudo-races or ethnic group, turning their beliefs into discriminations or aggressions. Individuals could also participate in implicit racism when they make judgments about people from different pseudo-racial or ethnic groups using implicit or unconscious biases. They consequently hold prejudicial attitudes toward members of the so-called races or ethnic groups, turning their biases into minor day-to-day instances of ambiguous racist acts, such as microaggression or behavior that have been described as racism with a smile. Implicit racism is outside of people's awareness, and it is generally a product of their socialization. Moreover, while implicit racism is not less harmful than explicit racism, evidence tends to show that it is even more prevalent in our society, as people are not aware of their own biases and how they dictate their decisions and acts. The second individual behavior to understand is the internalized racism, as defined as the acceptance by members of a stigmatized group of negative messages about their own abilities and intrinsic worth. For some authors, internalized racism is the last piece of the puzzle of racism. Internalized racism is translated into consequences for the marginalized people in terms of self-devaluation, self-rejection, resignation, and helplessness. Moreover, those who internalize racism could also feel a resigned indifference over racism, or even worse, contribute to reinforce racism among their relatives or their social network. At a larger scale, racism becomes systemic when traditionally accepted inequities keep certain groups from fully participating in the workplace, in schools, and in many other social institutions. Systemic racism is based on a combination of biases from within society, ingrained in its historical, social, institutional, and political system that result in the generation of unequal and discriminatory outcomes through the application of policies, laws, regulations, patterns, practices, technologies, and other decision-making tools. However, policies, practices, and patterns which are ostensibly neutral could still produce discriminatory outcomes. In other words, purposeful biased treatment and intentions are not necessary components of systemic racism, which reality is only proven through the existence of discriminatory outcomes. Finally, at an even larger scale, racism becomes structural when discriminations are fostered through mutually reinforcing systems of housing, education, employment, earnings, benefits, credit, media, healthcare, and criminal justice. Mounting evidence demonstrates that people from minorities are disproportionately overrepresented compared to members of the majority in several areas used to measure systemic and structural racism, such as poverty, unemployment, health, justice, and so on. That is exactly what we are going to explore in our next videos on the theme of racism. Stay tuned for the next videos of public utility.